Listen, learn, and enjoy.
It's The Lisa Show.
With Lisa Valentine Clark and Richie T. The Lisa Show is happening now.
How do you know whether something is a real business or just a scam? Coming up in 20 minutes, we're going to talk about popular scams and how to avoid them.
I am a fan of ice cream. I am equally a fan of Subway sandwiches, but this new creation I'm not sure I can get behind. I'll tell you about it coming up in your Morning Buzz.
Now, we know that a lot of people are coming off of a long weekend. You're a little bit tired, and maybe you're going through some more than just a little bit of tiredness and dragging and languishing. Maybe you're going through something that's a little bit more difficult.
Are you saying that maybe I'm coming out of 18 months of maybe the hardest time of my life?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are, as we're looking around at each other and sort of checking in on our friends and our families, ourselves, we can realize that a lot of us go through hardships in life that we don't plan for. And during these intense times and trials, it can be hard to find a way out of that grief, see brighter days ahead. So how can we change our perspective and give the possibility of hope a chance in our minds when we've lived through tragedy? Well, here to talk with us today is Patrick Argiro, a certified trauma professional, a grief counselor with his own personal experience with trauma and how he turned it into his life's mission to help others find their way back to peace and comfort. And we thought this is a perspective that we could all use right now. So we're excited to talk to him about overcoming trials, what we can look for each other. Welcome, Patrick.
Well, thank you so much for having me. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing well, and we are excited to have a perspective, I think, on this overwhelming sort of feeling that a lot of us have settled in on us.
I appreciate that. And before we get started, I just want to say I'm very excited to hear about that ice cream and Subway story.
Right.
Well,
this is something we can hope for, right?
You be patient, Patrick. It's coming up.
What is it?
Okay, because I'm going to tune in for that.
But. Right. I'm glad. Why do you think that it can be so difficult for us to move past trials, even though we know that it's not good just to sort of sit in them and ruminate? But what is it about it that it just makes it so hard to take that first step forward?
Well, it's essentially habits. It's what we've been trained to do. In certain families, it's a normal thing. I can speak from perspective on my family is, guilt is something that, just runs in our, being an Italian Catholic from New York, it's a normal thing. And so trying to break those habits is just very challenging, but there's easy techniques to do. And then there's not harder, but more complex techniques. So if I could give you like an analogy about guilt, if I could.
Sure.
I grew up in New York. My best friends include Italians, Irish, and Jewish. And so if guilt was an Olympic sport, it would be the Jewish would get the gold, according to my friends and their mothers, and Italians would get the silver. If mothers could run about guilt. So that it's just how we're kind of sort of brought up in how we think. And so changing that, you have to learn to do, and there's techniques you can use. You have to try to reframe the thoughts, and it's not as hard as people may think. So, but it is something that you have to work on every day. That's what I do every day.
I'd like to take a little bit of a step backward and look at this idea of pain and of grief in a broader sense, before we get down to the sort of nitty-gritties about those kinds of habits, because I think that there's this idea that a lot of us need that sort of pain and grief, and it's part of the healing process. As a counselor, what's your perspective on that?
Well, here's the thing. when you're in grief is normal. But when it starts to become what we call complicated grief, that's when it takes a little turn for the worst. And so what you have to do is, it's a process. You go through it. It's normal to feel certain things. But when it starts to become such questions like, I could have done something in certain situations, or I'm not good enough, or whatever the situation may be. What I like to tell people is, for example, is if you lost a loved one like I did. I lost my father during COVID, and it was heartbreaking, and it really did really just mess with me. But then I just had to reframe it. The question I ask is, if they were here, would they want you to be suffering the way you are? Do you think they want you to be suffering the way you are? So if you're feeling this grief, you can't move, you can't function. This is what they would want. So you have to live the best life for yourself, but also for them. And so that's how I take that. Now, grief is a very complex thing, so it's not something you could just do right away. Like one of the questions that I asked my mother, and you can't ask this question, you cannot ask this question right away or they will think you're crazy, but you wait some time, and then as a counselor, you ask the question, has anything positive come out of this loss? Mm-hmm. And for some people, there was a gentleman who lost, I know this is a positive show, so I want to keep it positive, but a gentleman who lost a loved one, and then he thought about it and said, I stopped drinking. For someone else, for my mother, I'm much more independent. For me, I appreciated what my dad tried to do while he was here. And, those things like being dependent, being very, always able to count on him. Mm-hmm. You take certain things for granted. And so you can't ask someone that like 2 weeks later, but you can ask them a couple months after some therapy and trying to reframe the mind and after doing some mindful practices, how do you feel about this right now? And usually you'll be very surprised. So
we're talking with Patrick Argiro about overcoming grief. I would be curious because I think in one way or another, each of us have experienced grief, whether it's as recent as the pandemic and we lost someone that way, or there are other things that have occurred in our life which we grieve over. I know that taking the opportunity to be able to reframe it in our mind is a great kind of way to find ourselves through the overcoming. But what if we're just consumed with the grief? The what if I would have done this differently, and can't seem to find ourselves on the other side of grief? What do we do in that case?
The what ifs are some of the worst things you could possibly do to yourself. The what ifs will drive you crazy. I don't use the word crazy loosely, but it will really hurt you. It will affect how you live your daily life. What if this had happened? What if that happened? You can't live in the what ifs. I study Stoic theory, and you got to live in the moment, right? And that's hard when you're going through the grief to tell somebody that. I have lived through this sort of thing, so I understand. I understand that you can't just snap your fingers. And, sometimes, I'll talk to veterans, and I interviewed, I have a podcast as well, and I interviewed Leah Letson of the UFC. And when she came home, she suffered from PTSD, and someone told her, get over it. Get over it. And that's not the right thing to say. Because if you can go, if you don't handle the grief the right way, it could go very wrong. It could go very wrong. So what I recommend to people is, if you feel you don't have the ability to handle it yourself, which a lot of people don't, I would suggest look for a grief specialist in your area. If you don't have, I'm always big on, in my older years, I'm 46 years old, I've become a little more frugal. I didn't say cheap, I said frugal. And so that's important because I'm single and I don't want the women to hear that and say, oh, what's this? So, but you could call certain hotlines and talk to people and just get that cleared up. It's kind of like a Band-Aid in a way, but if you're struggling really bad that day, also there's local places, clinics that offer free counseling. You just have to look that up in your community. I know when I was homeless for 3 years. And I tried to utilize every program I could, whether it be health, whatever it could be. So these are the slight suggestions. Could I give a quick suggestion to people?
Please,
if you don't mind. Okay, so what I want people to do is in the morning when you get up in the morning, try to get up. Let's say you normally get up at 8 or something. If you have to rush to work, try to get up an extra half hour early and essentially try to plan your day out in advance. Try to do certain exercises. So get up in the morning and for about an hour, drink a little water in the morning and then do these six basic routines. One of them is when you get up, just rest. Just kind of like meditate for about 10 minutes. The second one is, I know it sounds very simple, but this is a quick interview, right?
Yeah, I love them. I love them.
I
Number
love
2, let's do it.
People are looking for solutions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then you want to visualize where do you want your life to be. Just 10 minutes a day. It's just 10 minutes. Well, it's an hour each day. It's an hour total, but you visualize. Then you journal for 10 minutes. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through. This is how you put your thoughts down on paper. And of course, if you don't want anyone to see the paper, then hide the book.
Sure.
Right? But if you're married and you're like, my wife is driving me crazy, maybe don't keep it in the living room. So the other thing is reading for 10 minutes a day. Now I cheat on that one. What I do is I audio, so audiobook. So I listen to an audio book for 10 minutes a day, and that really helps me. Affirmations. Now, some of this stuff is going to sound a little silly. Like if you're saying, I would say them out loud personally. But if you're but I'm a single guy in a house where no one's going to hear me. But if you want to just say them in your mind, that's fine. Like, I am going to do well. Today's going to be a great day. And then exercising for 10 minutes a day. And for me, I have chronic back pain, so for me, it's stretching. So and stretching for me feels like exercise. Like when I'm done, I'm sweating. So these are the exercises that I would do: positive affirmations, visualization, and then there's another exercise you can do that might seem a little crazy, but it's actually called laugh yoga. And laugh yoga is where you force yourself to laugh. So what you do is, if you don't want anyone to see you, but you can't really worry about what people think. When we're done with this interview, your opinion of me is really none of my business. And that's not to say I don't respect your opinion. It's just you can't get caught up in what other people think. You got to do what's best for you.
Right.
It's great advice, and it's not mine. It's just out there. I used to care about what people think, and now it's like, what you think about me as long as you're doing your best to live a good life, it doesn't really matter. But back to laugh yoga. So laugh yoga, and I would definitely Google this or YouTube this. It forces you to laugh, and if you could look up a laugh yoga group in your area, it's so much more fun with other people, because what's happening is they're doing these exercises where they're forcing themselves to laugh, and it's so ridiculous
that it really makes you laugh, doesn't it?
It's just like, yeah, you're watching it and you just start really laughing because you're like, this is so silly, but it's so. And then I like silly as a former stand-up comedian, so I get a kick out of it. There's other things I want people to look up, such as tapping. So that's where it's almost like tapping is where you hit certain body parts on your hand or on your neck.
There's so many different kinds of resources to look for in the midst of, difficult times, certainly in grief, and you've really hit us with a lot of them, and we appreciate your time.
The actionable steps that have been given to us by Patrick Argiro. We thank you so much. He is a certified trauma professional, a grief counseling specialist. You can learn more about his work on Twitter at Cousin Pat Therapy. And I know that you said you didn't care about what our opinion was of you, but Patrick...
Well, it was just none of his business.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
None of his business, but I want you to know I think you're an upstanding gentleman. Thank you for being on the show.
Now, have you ever been scammed online?